Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video, and today we're going to be looking at the 2022 Senate elections as of July 3rd, 2021. Just a few things I want to talk about before I start this video. So, I am currently in the District of Columbia, which is pretty cool considering I run a political channel. I'm a political junkie, and I did actually see the White House on the 1st, which was yesterday when filming this video. It'll be 2 days when this gets uploaded to my channel. But I did post it on Instagram, so I'm going to briefly pump my Instagram. It's at UEP_YouTube. I don't have a big following on there. I think I have like 70-something followers. But if you could follow me on Instagram, if you don't already, that would be a huge help to me and the channel. And I also do post on Twitter. It's like the social media that I associate with my channel that I'm most active on. And Twitter, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram, and here. Now, I'm also, I believe at the time of this recording, 22 subscribers away from hitting that 5K mark that we've been looking at really since the beginning of this year. I hit 4K, I remember the night of the Georgia runoffs, and right now I'm on track to hit 5K in a couple of days. So if we could do that on the 4th of July, that would be cool. Especially because it is Independence Day, it would be cool to have it on a political channel. But so with that being said, subscribe if you haven't already. Follow my social media: Twitter at UEP YouTube, Instagram at UEP YouTube. Yeah. So we're now going to take a look at our safe states for the Democratic Party, which are going to be Washington, Oregon, California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New York, New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Colorado. So Colorado, I've been kind of flipping back and forth between the safe and likely column. I always seem to kind of put it in the likely column because I say, Michael Bennet is not likely to win this race by by as much as Joe Biden won. Biden won it by 14, and that was in a D plus 4.5 year, right? That was a year that was not a blue wave, but it was a favorable year for Democrats. It was not a red wave, and it wasn't really an even year either, because the even year in this day and age would be a red wave, and 2022 could be an even year. So the Democrats in Colorado, I think that they've got a couple things going for them. First, Colorado is a very high turnout state where it doesn't really. The reason that it's gotten so blue is because the Denver area of college-educated white voters is turning out for the Democratic Party at higher rates than nearly every other state. So I think that that's going to keep Colorado in the safe column. It's obviously not going to be a Republican pickup no matter what happens. So it could be easily likely, and it wouldn't really matter, but I've had that debate with myself a couple times, but that Colorado being safe puts the Democrats up to 46 seats. The Republicans have a lot of safe seats as well. They got Utah, Idaho, the Dakotas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, Alabama, South Carolina. And yes, it's 44 safe seats for the Republicans. Most of these are not worth going over. Iowa could be safe if Chuck Grassley retires, but I don't think he's going to. I think he's going to run for, I believe, a 9th term at the age of 88, which is crazy. But he's going to run for a 9th term, and he is a very popular guy in Iowa. Probably going to win by over 20%. Missouri, it would only be likely if the Republicans run Eric Greitens and the Democrats run like Jay Nixon or something. Even if Eric Greitens is the GOP nominee, I don't really think it would be any less than a 12-point margin of victory for the Republicans. Even though Greitens is a bad candidate, he has sexual assault allegations going against him, but Missouri is just a really polarized state that hasn't really moved anywhere. Even in a blue wave, we had a Democratic incumbent, Claire McCaskill, who was decently popular. She wasn't crazy popular, but she wasn't unpopular. She should have won in a D plus 9 year. She still lost by a likely margin. So Missouri trending to the right politically, and I don't think that that the Democrats have a future here, in whether it be 2022 or beyond. So yeah. Going over to our likely D states now, we've got a couple interesting things I think we should talk about here. So right now, I actually don't think that there are any likely D states. However, I am going to say that there is a state that's close to likely. I'm going to put it in that column. I'm going to say that Nevada is close to likely. I'm not going to say that it's likely because that will be too bold of a prediction. I never had Nevada as likely D for the 2020 election. Even in a year ago at this time in July, Biden was on track to win according to some people with up to 400 electoral votes. I never really was on the 413 bandwagon. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, basically it was the best case scenario for Joe Biden that he'd win 413 electoral votes. I was never really on that bandwagon. I had Joe Biden always winning with, at his peak, I had him winning with I think 333 electoral votes, which is basically, I think, every state he won minus Georgia plus Florida, North Carolina, something like that. In a couple of districts I flipped around. I could be a little off, but that was in the summer peak for Joe Biden. And then at one point I think I had him winning with only like 278 electoral votes. There was a point where I had him winning with that, like April or May or something. But my final prediction, I was 49 for 50. I'm pretty proud of my prediction. I only got Georgia wrong, but I never had to. People always had this assumption that Nevada was going to be a pretty safe state for Joe Biden. I never really thought that. I still think it's going to be safe for the Democrats in the Senate. But I do think that the Republicans are kind of screwed in this race because, first of all, their only hope was the Nevada Democratic Party imploding, which people thought it did back in March. They had a leadership switch, but Judith Whitmer, who was elected the chair of the Nevada Democratic Party, was a Democratic socialist. She was supposed to be this terrible leader for the party and supposed to cost them a ton of support. And what happened was she was already the chair of Clark County Democrats. She's going to stay the chair of Clark County Democrats, and she's going to continue helping the Democrats out in Clark. But, the Washoe County Democratic Party, which was the second most influential part of the party behind Clark, basically just said, no, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to run the party on our own. So Nevada's nothing really should change in terms of what the Nevada Democratic Party is doing overall. It might be a little more left-leaning than it was in the past, but it's still going to be a pretty similar thing to what we saw in 2020, what we saw in 2018. So I don't think Nevada's really going to flip. And the Republicans, Adam Laxalt is right now the front runner for that nomination. I think there's also talk of former Miss Nevada running. I don't think she's going to. But Adam Laxalt is a pretty bad candidate. He lost the 2018 gubernatorial election by, I think, 6%. And he ran behind Donald Trump and Dean Heller. So I think that, we could easily see Catherine Cortez Masto winning by over 5. Right now, I'm not going to bet on it, but it's pretty close to likely. Now, for our likely Republican states, I think we're going to have to put Alaska in the likely category. So with ranked choice voting, Lisa Murkowski isn't as screwed as she could be, and I think she's going to end up winning this race because the Democratic nominee is going to probably maybe come in second, Murkowski come in third. But the Democratic voters are going to overwhelmingly put Murkowski second as the ranked choice ballot. And I think that's going to end up giving her the election by maybe 7 to 10%. So that's just my guesstimate right now. Again, Alaska's a really hard state to analyze, so I'm not going to talk about it too much until we actually see the candidates and what in the polls. I'm just going to be probably a year from now at the earliest. So going over to the state of Ohio, this is another state that I think the Republicans are going to win by a lot, and I'll tell you why. So the state of Ohio is a state that the Democratic Party has really been bad at winning elections at for a very long time, but specifically the past 6 years. So since Obama won the state in 2012, they have not won a statewide race, really, with one exception. Sherrod Brown, Senate win in 2018, but Sherrod Brown is a unicorn, and he's really a phenomenal candidate for Democrats that they're not going to ever replicate. They're not really going to replicate for the near future. So Ohio, the suburbs of Columbus are the only area of the state that is trending to the left. The working class areas have been shifting right, red for a while, with or without Trump, and the rural areas are blood red. So I don't think that even though Tim Ryan's a good candidate for Democrats, he can make some reversion in the working class areas. He's not good enough to make the state even lean, and I think he's going to lose by 6 or 7. Maybe he runs a little ahead of Joe Biden because he's going to have a better campaign in Ohio than Joe Biden did, but realistically, Ohio is not flipping. So, yeah. And then there is one last state that I want to characterize as likely Republican. That's Florida. So I think Florida is a state that, I posted this on Twitter the other day. Florida, I think the Senate race could be a little closer than people think. I'm not saying Marco Rubio is going to lose. I'm not saying it's even competitive. I'm not saying Democrats should really focus on the race. It would be a waste of. It would be kind of like a repeat of Montana Senate of 2020, which I know I said was a toss-up, and that's my worst prediction of the election by far. I'm very embarrassed about that, but this is a race that Republicans are probably going to win by 5 to 7%. People have been saying they're going to win by 10, but Florida's still too polarized for that to happen, realistically speaking. So I would expect Florida to stay for right now, or Florida to stay in the likely column and be under 10%. But I think Rubio's going to do a little worse than Trump in some rural areas in the Panhandle or in the central part of the state in between Orlando and Palm Beach County. So that could cause a little bit of reversion there, especially if the Democrats run Val Demings, who's a police chief who could help them out in the rural areas. But Rubio is going to do better with Hispanics than Trump, which he could make. Miami-Dade County would probably be tilt or lean D for Rubio versus Demings. We could see even Broward, Palm Beach County come into under 20% for the Democrats, which would be historic. And he also would do better, like I said, in the suburbs. That could be flipping Pinellas County, making Hillsborough County a toss-up, or flipping Duval County. So he's got Rubio is a strong candidate. He's going to win, but I think he could win by a little less than people think. So yeah, that's it. Now for our lean D states, I'm going to say Arizona and Georgia are currently lean for the Democratic Party. So Arizona and Georgia are, first of all, to start with Arizona, we saw the new party registration numbers for the month of June come out. And the Democrats are gaining in Arizona. They're gaining in Maricopa County. They're gaining in Pima County. And they're gaining in a couple northern counties. The rurals are shifting red. But the net gain was, I think the Democrats gained like 20,000 voters in Arizona, which is a pretty substantial amount. And, 20,000 isn't a lot. But remember, Joe Biden won the state of Arizona by, I think, 15,000, 10,000 voters. And I know my phone's going off in the background. I'm actually sitting in my bed. It's because I don't have my setup right now because I'm in Washington, D.C., but my phone's going off. And if you can hear that in the background, I apologize. But yeah, so Arizona, Mark Kelly is I'm assuming he's pretty happy with the numbers that he saw, the party registration numbers. So I do think that he's going to win re-election, especially if the GOP runs Mark Brnovich. Brnovich has been floated as a good candidate, but he doesn't have the ability to get the Trump base out. He might do a little better in Maricopa, but that's pretty much it for him. And I think that he would lose this race by maybe even more than Martha McSally. I think he'd lose it by 3 or 4. McSally lost it by 2.4%. So Arizona not looking good for the GOP right now. And Mark Kelly is a pretty unproblematic incumbent. People aren't going to vote. Undecideds are going to break for him because they're not going to vote against a guy who they really don't have too much of a problem with. And he's right now, I think, at 25% favorable with Republicans, which, again, still a pretty bad amount. But in today's environment, getting a quarter of the other party to approve your performance as a senator is pretty good. So he could get, maybe a similar amount of Republican votes, which would give him the election. I'd also expect him to win moderates, by the way, because he has identified as a pretty moderate guy, but I think that goes without saying. Now, in Georgia, I had this as Till D, but I think after reconsidering my positions, Herschel Walker would have a hard time winning a Senate race in Georgia. He doesn't even live there right now, and he also has some scandals. I think he held a gun to his wife, and that's just not really a place that Republicans want to go, especially because they tried to attack Raphael Warnock for apparently beating his wife. The allegations, I believe, turned out to be false, but they tried to do that and they ended up losing that runoff. So Herschel Walker, not necessarily the best candidate for the GOP here. And again, he might not even get the nomination. Trump just floated him as a candidate and said he might run. So that's why people are talking about him. But I still think he'd lose probably by 2 or 3. Arizona still votes to the right of Georgia, or Georgia still votes to the right of Arizona. Just, they're both lean at this point, instead of Georgia being tilted. Now, for our lean Republican states, I don't think that there's any, except for North Carolina. I originally had this as tilt. I'm going to move it to lean. Not saying that anything really has changed in this race, but just because Ted Budd is a pretty good candidate for the Republicans in North Carolina, and I think with Trump's endorsement, he's kind of got he's kind of got the primary. If it's Pat McCrory, I think it moves to toss-up. If it's Mark Walker, I think it's tilt Republican. But as of right now, I think lean is just the adequate rating. Not saying the Democrats can't win or that they've fallen since I last did my prediction, but just I think lean is the better rating than tilt. Now, these 3 states are the tilt states. These states are going to determine the Senate. So, first, to make it, just for fun, to tie it up, I'll say New Hampshire's tilt Republican. So, I originally had this as a lean state, but moving it down to tilt because A, Chris Sununu might not even run, which would be a huge disappointment for Republicans if Sununu doesn't run. And B, we also have to remember that Chris Sununu is a guy who is very good at getting Democrats to cross over. In New Hampshire, by the way, New Hampshire is a weird state politically. It's a very independent state where they vote. In 2020 they voted 15 points for Democrat at the Senate level, 7 points for Democrat at the presidential level, and then 33 points for Sununu at the gubernatorial level. So pretty independent voters here. And I think that New Hampshire is a hard state to predict politically. So I think it'll be tilt Republican if Sununu does run, which I think 60-40 he does, but not, I would have said 75-25 a couple months ago. So yeah, all of it's tilt Republican, but the race is still winnable for Democrats if he does run. So yeah, now these last 2 states are 2 Rust Belt states that, really the 2020 election came down to these states partially, and the Senate race in the Senate controlled 2023 is going to come down to these states as well. So I'm going to give Pennsylvania to the Democratic Party. This is giving them a majority. And I do think that Pennsylvania is going to be tilt. I had it as lean, but I'm going to move it down to tilt because that primary is going to be really rough, especially if Connor Lamb runs. Between him, Kenyatta, potentially Madeline Dean, and potentially Connor Lamb, and potentially John Fetterman, or no, Fetterman, Kenyatta for sure, Lamb, and Dean maybe. So Pennsylvania, I think that each of these Democratic candidates has strength. Kenyatta can do well in the Philly city itself. Fetterman would do better work in class and rural areas. Potentially, Lamb would do well in the suburbs. Dean would do really well in the suburbs. So, ideally, the Democrats would just combine all these candidates into one super candidate who would win the state by 20 points. But unfortunately for them, they can't do that. And the Republicans, I think, on the other, not to say the Democrats aren't organized, but the Republicans in Pennsylvania have been losing statewide races narrowly for a very long time. And 2022 looks to be kind of a repeat of what we've seen in the past because they're either going to run Sean Parnell or Ryan Costello as of right now. And Parnell is a guy who is a very Trumpian candidate who ran against Connor Lamb. He lost a congressional race, but was a very Trumpian guy and ended up getting a lot of media attention. And then Ryan Costello was a moderate, and I say moderate kind of with quotations because he didn't really vote as moderate. He just ran himself as a moderate to run in a suburban seat that he ended up dropping out of in 2018 after it was ungerrymandered. He ran into a gerrymandered seat that ended up being converted into a Democratic seat that he retired from and then let the Democrats pick it up in 2020 or 2018. So Costello has the ability to appeal to some moderates, but he wouldn't get the Trump base out, and Parnell would I think he'd be a little better than Costello, but Parnell is still a candidate that would not be very good for the suburbs of Philadelphia, which turned against Donald Trump in the 2020 election. So I'll say it's tilt D, but the Republicans can still win, especially if that primary really hurts the Democratic Party there, because John Fetterman is the favorite right now, but he's not a great candidate, and he's not ideal because he has a minor scandal where he did apparently hold a gun to a man's head. Now, the man actually who's in jail now actually has endorsed him, which is interesting, but still you still never want to be accused of being a violent person when you're running for Senate. So Wisconsin's the last state, and I'm going to give it to the Democrats. I've been saying it's tilt D for a while now, and I'm going to keep it that way. Like I said, Ron Johnson is not likely to do as well as he did in the WOW counties as he did in 2016, mostly because he's gotten less moderate since then. And I think he's going to do worse in the rural areas than Donald Trump did in 2020. He did very well in the rural areas and still lost Wisconsin. And I think Johnson's going to do even worse than that. So I think Sarah Godlewski or Tom Nelson, either one, I think would beat Ron Johnson, and I think they'd win by around a point each. Godlewski maybe a little more than Tom Nelson, but it really doesn't matter for right now. I think they're both I think they'd both be favored to win this race. So that'll be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. If you did enjoy, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Get me to 5K. I'll see you all in the next video.